Older family. I'm Pastor Chuck Estes of the King Campus, and I hope and pray that you're being blessed as much by this study of 1 Peter as I am. There is such an excitement in digging into God's Word, knowing that it is a living Word that has kind of a dimensionality to it, that it's deeper than mere words on a page. God's Word, to me, has a feel to it, has a depth. It has a taste, a smell that is so real. It's just as Jesus said right to the face of the tempter in Matthew chapter 4, verse 4, which says, "Man does not live by bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God." And so our journey into 1 Peter together is a feast of God's Word. And it's a great encouragement to us today, which is good news, because it seems that all we hear anymore on the news and on social media is bad news. COVID lingers on. Gas is higher than ever. Tragedies are happening in Buffalo and Texas and overseas. And so the time is right for an encouraging word. And that's just what we get in 1 Peter. Chapter 4 is a chapter that really came alive for me as I worked through the creating of this study guide. And as I began to work through it, I was asking questions of the texts that I thought you might ask. Questions like, what did Peter mean when he said so-and-so? Or how would you feel in the situation Peter is describing? But more and more, I began asking myself these questions, and that's when it became real. That's when you know that God's Word is speaking to you. One of the themes in chapter 4 that kept coming back to me time and time again was Peter's encouragement to love others even in the face of evil. We find this especially in verse 8, which says, "Above all, keep loving one another earnestly, since love covers a multitude of sins." Love earnestly, meaning to love like you mean it. And that kind of love, the love like you mean it kind of love, is a Christian superpower. I'm serious. God gave us this superpower to love each other with a Jesus kind of love so that others will see God's light in us. That's His glory. And then be attracted to Jesus in the same way that we are. And that earnest love, like Peter says, it covers a multitude of sins. We're encouraged to keep this in mind as we face the trials and tribulations of life. And life, as we know, isn't always pretty. And it's getting harder and harder, I think, to stick with being a Christian, not only in the way we act, but also in our hearts. I can think of quite a few times over the past few weeks that I didn't feel much like that love like you mean it kind of love. People can do some terrible things, evil things, and it's tough to just rise above. But then I remember a story in John's Gospel. And this is the story of the woman who was caught in adultery. And then I came to my senses. You see, the story's in chapter 8, and there's this woman who had been caught in committing adultery. She'd had an affair. And the Pharisees, the religious leaders of the day, brought her before Jesus, not to get his opinion, but to trap him. Jewish law decrees that a woman should be stoned to death for her sin. But Jesus just drew in the dirt while they were making their accusation. Then he rose and said famously, "Those without sin, cast the first stone." Well, of course, they all dropped their rocks and went on home. And for many readers, that's the end of the story. But there's more. And this next part is the part that always grabs me. Here's what happened. Jesus turned to the woman and he asked her, "Where are they? Has no one to condemn you?" And she said, "No one, Lord." And Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go, and from now on, sin no more." That's the kind of love I think Peter was getting at. That love like you mean it, that I don't condemn you either kind of love. And I just know that as you soak in this good word in 1 Peter chapter 4, you'll be blessed by it the same as I was, maybe more. Love earnestly, love like you mean it, and be blessed.